Hello! How you doing? Is that the Pee Wee Herman laugh? I don't think so. One of the things that people fundamentally don't understand, about Tesla, and there's a lot that they don't understand, is that the Wardenclyffe Tower was not based upon electricity. It was based upon sympathetic resonance and induction. Yeah. Tesla, of course, acknowledged the ether like 1 billion times over. And everybody was confused. Modern so-called science, which is not science at all. Nikola Tesla referred to these people as those who could think deeply but not clearly. He said you could be quite insane and be a deep thinker. You know, the people that aren't sane can't think clearly. That's why they're not sane. He said you have to be able to think both deeply and clearly. It's kind of a crude analogy. Like if I want to, this is an anemometer, measuring wind speed and temperature and whatnot. To maintain this at like 5 miles an hour, a stupid person might think that of course, you'd run out of breath very quickly to, it's basically right, I'd run out of breath very quickly. How do me, by my breath, and this is kind of a crude analogy, and this is not a direct analogy with sympathetic resonance, how would I keep this going at 5 miles an hour? Because I could do it for a few seconds if I take a deep breath. Right at about 5. But how could I keep going at it for hours? It would become really boring really quickly, obviously, but, you know, if someone paid me $10,000 to do it, I could certainly do it. Well, how could I do that and keep it steady at 5? Well, obviously I can't blow on it because I'd just quickly run out of breath. What if I actually did a pulse induction? Yeah? By the way, a Scram motor and that pulse engine is actually called pearl necklace pattern in upper atmosphere, a special type of jet. It's still top secret, actually uses extremely little fuel, and it actually sends out a pulse. They figured out that you could like travel around the world like 4 or 5 times on a simple tank of fuel on those jets, which is really brilliant, and that's still classified technology. I could do this, still keep it going at 5 miles an hour. I could keep that up for hours. It would become very boring very quickly, but in between each one of those pulses, I could actually catch my breath. Tesla's energy is phased in such a way that its counterspatial neutral would be at a universal grounding point. I'd like to go over some quotes of Nikola Tesla here and talked about what he talked about. Nikola Tesla's one of his patents from, here we go. It's too noted this phenomena here involved, the transmission of electrical energy, is one of true conduction and not to be confounded with the phenomena of electrical radiation, which has heretofore been observed, which the nature of propagation would render practically impossible for the transmission of any appreciable amount of energy at such distances that are of practical importance. This is patent 142,352. It is necessary to employ oscillations in which the rate of the radiation of energy into space in the form of Hertzian or electromagnetic waves is extremely small. To give an idea, I would say that the frequency should be smaller than 20,000 per second, though shorter waves might be practical. The lowest frequency would appear to be 6 per second, in which case there will be but one node at or near the ground plate. And paradoxical as it may seem, the effect will increase with the distance and will be the greatest. This is a far-field effect. Getting into far-field effect and actually keeping these videos simple is slightly difficult. But I'd like to get into what Nikola Tesla was talking about and the fact that he denied Hertzian waves and his technology was completely different. Everybody that's tried to dissect the Wardenclyffe Tower and Tesla wireless energy tech is making a huge mistake. Light is a compound circuit, and everybody's interested in the transverse phenomena of the coaxial circuit of light, i.e. the transverse electromagnetic. And this is the same thing I've pointed out in people that are fascinated about magnetism is that they could see the effect of magnetism and magnetic induction, but they're fascinated by the puppet rather than the person underneath it, which is the whole energy and power behind it. Everybody's missing the puppet master. What Nikola Tesla understood about wireless power transmission and the fact that it was non-Hertzian energy is the exact same thing I've pointed out, except completely different analogy, but still involving fields, is that magnetism is powered by dielectricity. Magnetism is the dielectric field, but everybody's fascinated by the ab extra effect around the magnet instead of the actual, that big giant black spot that you can actually see, and I've got like hundreds of videos underneath the ferrocell or the supercell. I don't have a magnet underneath here currently, and it's not powered on. But I mean, that's the power behind magnetism. But nobody throughout all of history has talked about that. You won't find any book on science that talks about that, and yet that's the power behind it. Fundamentally, and it's a very, very parallel analogy in what Nikola Tesla understood, the power behind all energy propagation is the rarefaction and compression of the circuit. And we have sympathetic resonance. We're not talking about frequency, which is perpetually on. They said the effect will increase with distance. I'd like to give some quotes from Nikola Tesla here as to the phenomena. Here we go. And they're very, very important. Appears clearly Mr. Tesla explained, it was not realized at first, that there is no Maxwellian ether. There's various, Tesla affirms the ether, but the idea of Maxwellian ether, there's 1,000 different versions of what the ether is or is not. He just denied the Maxwellian ether. There be no transverse oscillations in the medium. The Newtonian theory he believes in air because it fails entirely to be able to explain the small candle can project light with the same speed as the blazing sun, which of course has immensely higher temperature and power. We have made sure to experiment, said Mr. Tesla, that light propagates with the same velocity irrespective of the character of the source, such that consistency of velocity can only be explained by assuming that it is dependent solely upon the physical properties of the medium, specifically density and elasticity. According to Mr. Tesla, the present broadcasting stations do not propagate Hertzian waves, as always been supposed, but acts more like an ether whistle, transmitting these wave phenomena through the ether, however, it should be said, of the ether, similar to waves transmitted by ordinary whistle through the air. He also expressed his disbelief in the Heaviside layer. I'm not interested in discussing the Heaviside layer. Ether whistle transmitting waves of the ether, similar to the waves transmitted by ordinary whistle through the air. Yeah, I got that one already, excuse me. Light bringing electricity, carrying something which fills all the space has been a large part of its creation, and its famous idea will be called into matter as merely vortices or whirlpools in this ether, may be regarded as one of the most far-reaching speculations in modern physics. The mechanical principle of which we obtain liquid air. I'm going to get into discussing liquid air. Light can be nothing other than a longitudinal disturbance in the ether involving alternating compressions and rarefactions. The basis of sympathetic resonance, excuse me, did I say resonance? I'll edit that out of this video. Sympathetic resonance. I'm always thinking 10 steps ahead, so sometimes I trip over my own feet because I'm thinking of 10 things at once. The aspect of sympathetic resonance regarding Nikola Tesla is that longitudinal coaxial circuit of light. This is not to be confused, and I have a graph that I posted up on the community page where Tesla energy is not to be confused with Hertzian wave frequency. And I'd like to actually get on to a discovery where, of course, frequency is equivalent to energy, and it would be a unique way of looking at E equals mc squared solved for matter. And by the way, this is, of course, attributed by everybody to Sir Albert Einstein, but it's not. Albert Einstein actually stole that from Henri Poincaré. 1 over c squared is where where Einstein stole and got his idea that he's most famous for today. E equals mc squared did not come from Einstein. I'd like to solve for matter and point out that frequency is equivalent to energy. And of course, even every branch of science admits to that, but that of course manifests the undeniability of the ether. Just as light, of course, is not an emission, as Nikola Tesla said, because light is nothing other than a disturbance in the ether, just as sound is not an emission, nothing emits sound, it actually generates a rarefaction and compression with a set frequency. And of course, the higher the frequency, the higher the energy required to manifest that frequency. Therefore, we must conclude, as there is no other answer, that frequency, which of course is equivalent to energy, since light is not an emission, this frequency, which is an energy equivalent, necessitates, of course, the ether. Longitudinal disturbance in the ether involving alternating rarefactions and compressions. In other words, light can be nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. This is Nikola Tesla also. His quote, we said here, regarded the greatest achievement of men of science, whose mind is bent upon the mastery of the physical universe, was nothing more than I stated in an unpublished address, from which I quote, according to an adopted theory, every ponderable atom is differentiated from a tenuous fluid, filling all regions of space merely by spinning motion and a whirl of water in a calm lake. He's basically calling all matter fundamentally a vortices of the ether, which of course is exactly what it is. Ultra-high capacitance light is hydrogen, the fundamental end of non-propagation frequency of light, and I'd like to talk about that in a second, and what its magnitude actually is above that of gamma radiation. By set movements of this fluid, the ether becomes gross matter. It is arrested, the primary substance reverts to its normal state. It appears possible for man, through harnessed energy of the medium and suitable agencyship, to create the starting and stopping of the ether whirls, to cause matter to both form and to disappear at his command almost without effort. I can go on further on that, but I don't want to bore you on that one. But this propagation barrier, which is C relative to light, and light's not an emission, is the hysteresis of the ether as against itself. It's the maximum rate of propagation. That's the frequency barrier over which propagation can no longer occur. But I mean, just as sound is not an emission, the hysteresis of the medium is that which we call the speed of sound. The hysteresis, or the maximum rate of induction, is a propagation barrier that we actually call C. But that's not a speed, that's a rate of induction, or the hysteresis in the medium. But we have then also, too, a frequency barrier. By the way, the frequency of hydrogen, which is called the hydrogen line, is 1.42 gigahertz roughly. And this is due to the geomagnetic precession of the atom. And they call it actually electron flipping, but that's not what's occurring. There's no such thing as an electron particle. The principle of saying Nikola Tesla denied, also to the discoverer J.J. Thomson. He said the electron was 1 unit of dielectric induction. So this is the Larmor frequency. Look up Larmor frequency. Larmor frequency of pole flipping of the hydrogen atom, which of course is the fundamental particle above that of gamma radiation. Gamma radiation is 30 exahertz, or essentially 30 billion hertz. So somewhere between the range of 40 to 50 billion hertz, or 40 to 50 exahertz, is where we actually have a frequency barrier. If we actually solve for m, which is matter, in this case we're talking about hydrogen, matter equals energy, or E, which is also to frequency, because frequency is equivalency of energy. And every branch of science, logically and rationally, of course, agrees with that. Frequency equals energy, and energy equals a frequency when we're talking about EMF, electromagnetic frequency. Solving for m, matter equals this energy, or this frequency, over c squared. C squared is not a speed. It's the rate of induction. In other words, at 40 to 50 billion hertz, which is measured in electrovolts, also too measured in joules, so somewhere, let's say 45 billion hertz, gigahertz, excuse me, 40 to 45 billion gigahertz over c squared, we have the propagation barrier where E over c squared equals 1. 1 unit of gross matter. before this was postulated by anybody, I made this video declaration years and years and years ago, and it was discovered a couple years ago that constructive interference between two super high powerful lasers spontaneously produced matter. So my prediction came true. I humorously called it hard light, but say 40 to 45 billion gigahertz over, which is the frequency barrier, over top of the propagation barrier, which is C. So frequency barrier over propagation barrier squared equals 1 unit equaling hydrogen. Isn't that fascinating? This is the reason why we see galactic jets and astrophysical jets emitting out trillions and trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen. When we have the frequency barrier over the propagation barrier squared, we have the production of hydrogen. Doesn't that make things simple? Frequency barrier over propagation barrier squared equals 1 unit of matter, or hydrogen. All atoms, whether it be gold, silver, or otherwise, are of course compounded hydrogen. Doesn't that make Mother Nature really simple? Doesn't that fall in line with Occam's razor and everything we understand about nature? Getting back to Nikola Tesla, the EM is the effect of the scalar, or the Tesla wave. The Tesla wave is not a wave, it's a rarefaction and a compression. The simplest analogy I could give to you is everybody's fascinated by the rope, well, it's just they're fascinated by the magnetism. You take a rope and you actually snap into effect a transverse vibration in the rope with a set frequency. This is visible, this is what everybody's fascinated by, and this is Hertzian wave. But these Hertzian waves is not what's driving the wave. What's driving the wave, and of course wave of what? A wave is not a thing. There's no such thing as a wave. A wave is not a thing in and of itself. Just as a shadow is not a thing in and of itself. A shadow is not a thing. It's a noun in the dictionary, but it's not a thing. It's an absence of something, that being light. Wave is not a thing, rather what something does. So everybody in this world is fascinated by frequency and wavelength, which is fine. You know, it helps us to measure a lot of things. It has a temporal variable, how many cycles per second, gigahertz, megahertz, terahertz, petahertz, exahertz, on and on. But the real mystery is in the rarefaction and compression of that coaxial circuit of EM. This is where they came up with the idea of the photon. The actual compression node, which is an energy node, is what they call a photon. There's such a thing as a photon. The phenomena, of course, is real, just as the phenomena of the so-called electron is real. There's no such thing as an electron particle. That's not me saying that. Dollard said that. Heaviside said that. James Clerk Maxwell said that. The discoverer J.J. Thomson said that. Nikola Tesla said that. But maybe you think you're smarter than these guys. And of course you're not. They said there's no such thing as an electron particle. There's only fundamentally one particle. This compression front energy, and by the way, if you want the best, crudest analogy of it, it would be you put a stick against the wall. You could hammer it and transfer energy nearly instantaneously from one end to the other, but anybody just looking at the stick isn't going to see anything. The same is true of the magnet. Everybody's fascinated by the magnetic field, but they're not fascinated by what's driving it. That being the dielectric. Tesla's energy, and this makes it really simple because I've got hundreds of videos explaining that about magnetism. Tesla's energy is akin to the dielectric that I've been talking about, that drives magnetism and drives the magnetic field. But no one has been talking about that for thousands of years. Nobody knows about it. I'm the first person on Earth, yes, I am the first, that's accurately defined what the magnetic field is, what's driving it, how a magnet works, why a magnet works, yada, yada, yada. I've got thousands of videos on that topic, literally. Everybody in likewise fashion is fascinated by Hertzian energy, but they're not realizing what's driving it. Tesla is telling you his technology. I used in my community post a worm grunting analogy. I don't know if you know what worm grunting is. Tesla's energy, where he talks about it in his quote, he says, "Years ago I was in a position to transmit wireless energy to any distance without limit other than that imposed by the physical dimensions of the globe. In my system, it makes no difference what the distance is. The efficiency of the transmission can be as high as 97%. There are practically no losses except that such as are inevitable in the running of the machinery." In other words, the physical mechanics of the machinery running. When there is no receiver for the energy reception, there is no energy consumption anywhere. Isn't that brilliant? When the receiver is put on, it draws power. This is the exact opposite of Hertzian wave system technology. In that case, if you have a plant of 1,000 horsepower, it is radiating energy all the time, whether the energy is received or not. But in my system, the power is not lost. Kind of a really crude way of looking at Tesla's energy system. Of course, it is nodal. The nodal energy of Nikola Tesla's energy is along that longitudinal. It's the rarefaction and compression, which doesn't partake of a space-time variable because it has no transverse frequency. It's measured in volts per second, not frequency or cycles per second. As a crude analogy, I use worm grunting. You guys have like 1,000 videos on YouTube. You just type in worm grunting. They take this stick that has slots in it, and they go at it and they stick it in the ground. These people are collecting worms for fishing and whatnot. They stick the stick in the ground, they rub another stick against it, which goes along these ridges, and it causes the stick to grunt. And all of a sudden, that would be analogous to the receiver. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, the worms respond to the grunting, and they start popping their little heads up out of the ground. It's called worm grunting, and of course the people pick up the worms. Of course, the worms would be analogous to energy. They're always there, but until you call upon it, it's nothing to be seen. It's like, where's the energy at? There's no way Nikola Tesla's energy works. He's sending out the energy, and, where is it? Where is it? Tesla's energy is phased such that the energy would be analogous to the worms, and the receiver would be analogous to the grunting stick. It's like when you put up the receiver, and you make a harmonic sympathetic phase to the counterspatial energy, then the worms manifest. That's a really crude analogy. It can't get better than that. Tesla energy is phased such that the counterspatial neutral would be at a universal grounding point. Well, the universal ground is, wait for it, the ether itself. It's like, where's the ground? Where's the energy? I don't see it. It's like that Shakespeare quote, I see not, but all there is I do see. A very, very ignorant statement, by the way, if you understand Shakespearean English. So you have to think about that one for a second. Tesla maintained that the energy would be transferred by means of current energy rather than Hertzian wave systems. And the term non-Hertzian wave, of course, has often been used to label this. But we could refer to it as Tesla scalar, Tesla energy. But this is the nodal energy measured in volts per second, not cycles or frequency per second. Yeah. The energy's always there. But until you have a receiver to tap off of it, the same thing is true in a clutch, like it's always spinning, but until you engage it, one gear with the spinning gear, the gear keeps spinning and the energy's always there. But until you engage it, you're not tapping off any energy. You can say the same thing is true of alternating current, but in this case, that spinning gear in counter space does not have to be perpetually fed the energy. The energy is there to be tapped off of, like a capacitor. Now, capacitors do leak over time, but we're talking about a non-leaky capacitor because the ultimate capacitor is, wait for it, the ether itself. So you don't have to keep feeding it to maintain a capacitance. You feed that capacitance, and when someone taps into it, then they can draw from it. I think that makes it way clearer than anybody else has made it regarding Hertzian and non-Hertzian. Tesla quite unequivocally claims that he does not work with Hertzian wave systems, but with the waves of a very different kind, which is not a wave, it's a nodal rarefaction and compression. Because a wave is not a thing. There ain't no such thing as a wave. Like this is a wave, like, yeah, those are your hands moving. A wave is not a thing. Can I mention that once again? A shadow is not a thing. It has no principality. Because a shadow is an absence of light. But a shadow itself is nothing in and of itself. Neither is a wave. People think in terms of waves. It is the exact same thing that Tesla was pointing out in his energy system that I've been pointing out for like a decade now regarding magnetism. What's driving magnetism is not magnetism, because magnetism is a dielectric field, but everybody's fascinated by magnetism. Ooh, look at the magnetism. It's like that's not what is powering the magnetism, because it's a conjugate relationship. The coaxial circuit of light is a conjugate relationship also. Center conductor, and then you actually have the shielding where the transverse frequency of the EM occurs. Coaxial. I don't even know what the cross-section of a coax system is, but you should know, and you can find like 1 billion pictures of it on a Google image search. So it's a compression front energy. You can call it nodal or rarefaction and compression. The more accurate would be a compression energy front system. This is Tesla energy. Of course, Hertzian transverse is frequency. It perpetually has to be fed. It's extremely lossy. It has to have transmission lines. That's the nature of the beast. It has to have transmission lines. It has to have wavefront guidelines. Whether it's AC or DC makes no difference. This is not Tesla energy. Different combinations of simultaneous and sequential interactions define the vibration set structure, the diversity of which is based upon the variation of the basic motive that allows the limits of the energy. In this way, the stable holographic structure of this fractal type of energy, which of course is a compression front energy, is created by volumetric vibrations, which make a cubical standing wave system, which is not really waves. Waves of what, once again? Of nodal points that are then manifested as the corresponding phenomena to be tapped off of. Actually, it's not phenomenal until it's tapped off of. But this was Tesla's energy system. It was not Hertzian. I really simplified this as best I can. I mean, you go deep down the rabbit hole and then everybody would get mad at me saying I've overcomplicated it. They probably do that in this video. But that's not my intent. I'm not interested in complicating anything. I'm interested in simplifying things. But the nature of this is really simple. It really, really is. The same issue I deal with in explaining magnetism is the same thing people have their minds, a difficulty wrapping them around and understanding Tesla's energy system. Yeah. If you ever want to contact me, my email's in the description below. Any donation is very, very warmly welcome. I hope you have a lovely weekend. Lux e veritas. Goodbye.